Welcome. You are here today for the conference California at 175, Stuck or Moving Forward. This conference is presented by the Jesse M. Unruh Institute of Politics and the USC Center for the Political Future. My name is Kamy Akhavan. I'm the managing director of the center. Today's important event is held in alliance with our incredible partners at the USC Casden Institute and the USC Open Dialogue Project. In addition to those campus partners, we have joined forces with 3 student organizations in hosting today's event: the USC Political Union, a chapter of BridgeUSA, the Trojan Democrats, and the USC College Republicans. This conference takes place in the historic and beautiful Town and Gown Ballroom on the campus of the University of Southern California. It's also being Zoomed, live streamed onto Facebook, video recorded for YouTube, and audio recorded for our Let's Find Common Ground podcast. No matter how you are enjoying today's conference, we appreciate your joining us to gain insights from our incredible panelists about where California stands on the 175th anniversary of its statehood. Clearly, not everyone agrees about the state of our state, so hearing experts and diverse views delivered in a respectful manner is key to helping us gain needed perspective. Open dialogue is critical. With that in mind, I now have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Neeraj Sood, the director of the USC Open Dialogue Project, one of our proud partners, to discuss some of the ways that USC promotes civil discourse. Dr. Sood?
Thank you, Kamy, and welcome to USC. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm a professor at USC and the founding director of the Open Dialogue Project. Our aim is to have more dialogue on campus and more constructive dialogue on campus. So there's one rule, since this is a USC Open Dialogue event, there is one rule, which is all the panelists have to disagree with each other. If you all agree with each other, we're going to stop the event and then, call it a day. So, so first is, if you want to be unstuck or moving forward, we have to learn how to disagree with each other, and that's one of the goals of the project. And there are 3 rules or expectations for constructive disagreement. First, you have to let go of winning. So this is not a debate. You're not here to win an argument. We're here to understand each other. And once we let go of winning, the second rule comes in, which is you have to be curious and try to understand someone else's perspective. And the third rule is we should focus on ideas and not people. So, don't label people, focus on the ideas. You can go after any idea as much as you like. I hope that we embody these 3 expectations today, and I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Neeraj. You may be used to seeing our director, Bob Shrum, a legendary Democratic strategist, providing these welcome remarks. He is out today due to a medical illness. Get well, Bob. So here to provide leadership remarks on behalf of CPF is our co-director, the legendary conservative strategist, and my dear friend, Mr. Mike Murphy.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Kamy. Yes, Bob is under the weather, but getting better. So he apologizes, and he said, well, bottom of the barrel, they're going to have to sober Murphy up. But here he is, and I'm gonna try to persevere. I'll start by echoing Kamy a little and welcoming you to California at 175 years. Are we stuck or moving forward? Now, that is the most relevant possible topic. And it's particularly relevant right now because we are about, 85 days away from the primary in an extremely wide open governor's race with really no front runner other than I will bet money it'll be a Democrat. It's a Democratic state. But not impossible. We'll see. The voters are a little ornery. So this is going to be a defining year for California, both in terms of policy, politics, everything we can imagine. So I cannot imagine a better time to be doing this conference. And we have a great bunch of experts. We have political hacks. We have policy experts. We have visionaries. Being California, we tried for a crystal healer, but they're unionized and very expensive. So that's the only California appropriate thing we do not have, but I think you're going to enjoy it. It's going to be a civil discussion, as the professor said, because that's what we do here at the university and at the Center for the Political Future. I'm going to give you a minute of a plug for us. This thing, Bob Shrum is the grand poobah here. He prefers supreme leader, but that phrase is kind of not being used this week. But he's the boss, and I'm the Ed McMahon sidekick. He recruited me to this years ago at a Mexican restaurant. He called me to have lunch, and I thought, oh no, I'm going to get the world communism lecture again. But instead, he talked me into it, and I'm very, very glad I said yes. It's been an incredible experience. Bob and I have been professional enemies for decades. We have beat the hell out of each other in campaigns all over the country. But during that time, we have maintained a close personal friendship because your opponent need not and should not be your enemy. We disagree on everything. I mean, Trump's wrong on 90% of the issues. We all know that. But we're friends, and when the political argument and the campaign contest stops, you know, somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and we get to do it again. We don't burn down the arena where the contest is. And so we both have a deep dedication to helping the next generation. Excuse me, I think Shrum gave me his hoof and mouth disease when I saw him a few days ago. We believe in helping the next generation see public service as a good thing, break through the cynicism, and perhaps find a way to serve their community or their country. So that's our mission, and the kind of event we're having today is very key to that. So thank you all for participating and being part of it. I'm going to be on the next panel, so you're warned. I'm going to try to exceed the State of the Union, personal best for me, so get comfortable. But it's going to be a great topic on initiatives and referendums. So I'm going to turn it back to our erstwhile leader here, Kamy, and we're going to start the program. So thank you for coming.
Thanks, Mike. I love working with this guy. So I also want to give a special thanks to the team at the Center for the Political Future who helped put this event on today. That's students as well as staff. And a special thanks to our assistant director who worked so hard to make today's event possible, and that's Diego Andrade. Thank you very much, Diego. So I'm going to give about another minute or so of discussion. And while I do that, I'm going to ask if our panelists don't mind taking the stage from that side of the stage, because I'll be introducing you briefly. So today we're going to hear 3 different panels throughout the day. They're going to be exploring various aspects of our state's current and historic performance. Our final panel, going from last to first, our final panel is about whether California is taxing its citizens too much, too little, or just right, and whether we're getting enough value for those tax contributions. Our second panel is about the trends that have turned California from a red state that elected governors, including Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George Deukmejian, to a blue state that elected Gray Davis, Jerry Brown, and Gavin Newsom. Our first panel, the one we're about to hear, is about our state's unique relationship with ballot measures and propositions. That panel is being moderated by veteran Los Angeles Times political reporter Seema Mehta, who's also a current CPF Fellow. She is joined by Mike Bonin, and Mike was once a CPF Fellow, once an LA City Council member, and is currently running the Pat Brown Institute at Cal State Los Angeles. To my immediate left is Fernando Guerra, who is the director of the Center for the Study of Los Angeles at Loyola Marymount University, and he's also a USC alum. Yeah, fight on. Next is Amy Thoma Tan, who's the president of Cobalt Public Affairs and a senior strategist for many legislative and initiative ballots in California, including most recently Proposition 50. And finally, the man who helped get Arnold Schwarzenegger elected, and who has advised many campaigns throughout the Golden State, our co-director, Mr. Mike Murphy. Seema, my friend, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. I thought I was going to have to do introductions, but I can dispense with that page and we'll just get right to it. There are likely going to be many, many propositions on the November ballot. I mean, our ballots often look like CVS receipts in terms of how lengthy they are and also how exhausting they are to get through. So we may see questions about taxes, environmental policy, voter ID. But before we talk about what we might see in November, I want to talk about why we have this unique situation in California, what led to it, some of the ways, some of the really important propositions that have been passed in the past that really impact the state's budget, state's revenue, tax policy, that constrain state lawmakers in terms of how they can spend the money that they have. So just briefly, the initiative process in 1911, Californians were sort of frustrated by, the powerful, the wealthy, and special interests really deciding policy. And this was sort of part of the progressive era. It was, I think, what the direct democracy is part of a movement, really, and occurring across the country to sort of give the power back to the people and to bypass sort of the state's elected leaders, the politicians, the wealthy, et cetera. Since then, the ballot measures, as I said, have dramatically shaped California's budget, governance, and again, constrained state lawmakers and some decisions that in other states are already made by elected officials. So let's talk about some of the most impactful ballot measures in recent state history. Prop 13 in 1978. As a homeowner, I love it. But that said, it has severely impacted, the state's budget. Some believe that it played a role in President Reagan being elected to the White House in 1980. And then also let's talk about Prop 98, which directs, how the state's revenue, a certain amount of it has to be spent on education funding. And so could you guys just talk about how the ballot process, the propositions have sort of constrained or really limited in some ways what state lawmakers can do?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very ironic because this all started in the progressive era when the Southern Pacific Railroad ran California. So somebody said, well, we'll let the people run things. And now we can debate whether that's been good or bad, because often the people are running things in an initiative arena that's very much driven by who writes the bigger check and who is clever. I once beat an initiative on behalf of the saint-like owners of the telecom companies to beat the equally saint-like, greedy hospital association. But there was a fight to raid the treasury, and the idea was to put a small tax on cell phone bills. They did not present it as money for the hospitals. They presented it as rural ambulance service, which was very popular, even though that was 5% of the spend of the initiative. So these things are not a court of a lot of honesty often, but they become a huge deal. It is quite common now for an interest group to file an initiative, hiring folks like me, so I'm not going to bash it too much, but testing the language and try to get through the legal process, which controls the language, but knowing it'll pull in a scary way as a chip to muscle the legislature. That's what's happening in some ways now with this billionaire tax thing. So it is not, I think, what the progressives thought they were going to get out of this now 420 some initiatives later. And people do, it's a tricky one because people love the idea they have the theoretical power, but they think it's part of a political system they're very cynical about because they think it's driven by money. And it's not all driven by money. Public opinion does affect initiatives, often in a surprising way, but money sure helps. Somebody comes to me for an initiative and I'll say, vote yes, we're going to be at least 80, probably $120 million or more. I worked on the gaming one, the Indian tribes versus FanDuel and DraftKings. I was with the Indian tribes. That thing all in was about $400 million, fighting over whether or not your kid can bet on sports on their phone. Though FanDuel would say only adults because they have to promise. So anyway, it's become more of an auction, I think, than anybody ever intended.
And we're certainly going to talk about the billionaire tax later a little bit. So you're in Sacramento. So can you talk about what you see, in the State House in terms of the budget and how the initiatives have impacted,
Yeah, they have constrained the legislature in terms of what they can do. So, for example, we're in a rough budget year this year. How rough it is, I think, is still to be determined. And there are limited ways the legislature can raise revenue and limited ways they can cut. So half the budget because of Prop 98 just goes to education. There's nothing anyone can do about that, which some may say is a good thing. And then Seema's right, because of Prop 13, they can't just raise taxes on homes or even commercial properties, which I think there are people who would also agree that's a good thing. But it does make the universe of cuts or revenue raising the legislature can make more complicated. I also think there's lots of reasons to be cynical about California's initiative process, and I also participate in the gamesmanship, so I will also not completely bash it. But there are times it can be very useful for the voters to check the legislature and the governor when they're out of step with public opinion. For example, last year there was a ballot initiative on public safety and retail theft. It was not a popular initiative in Sacramento. The governor opposed it. Most of the legislature opposed it. It passed with nearly 70% of the vote. And I think, we've had one party rule in Sacramento now for more than a decade. And because of that, the electorate or the elected officials are to the left of where I think California's electorate really sits. And so if you have the resources, if you have the money, it can act as a check on that one party rule, but that is dependent on that check having the physical check to pass it.
And that is actually a perfect transition to my next question, which I'll ask the two of you about. So one of the things I think is most interesting about initiatives, the California Republican Party hasn't elected a statewide candidate since 2006, obviously the re-election of Governor Schwarzenegger, but let's not forget Steve Poizner, who everyone forgets. So while Republicans have not been successful with statewide candidates in 2 decades now, their views have been successful at the ballot box. I think when I looked, between 2010 and September of last year, the party's been victorious in more than 60% of the propositions it took a position on, according to data compiled by the state GOP. So while voters might not, are not, aligning with the candidates, they are aligning with many of the values pushed by the party. And I think Prop 36, which is a great example of that. So could you guys talk about, Councilman and Professor, can you talk about sort of the dichotomy between voters' views of Republican candidates versus their views of some of these positions?
Yeah. So first and foremost, an initiative is caused by the failure of the legislature to be able to referee and create the right dynamic and just punt to. I think Mike's example of the tribes versus the gaming industry, the legislature just won't make a decision, and therefore they really have to go to the initiative. Another aspect of it is that someone continues to lose in the legislature and wants to go above the legislature and do the initiative. And then third, to me, is always an ideological or cultural issue that the legislature also doesn't want to deal with, right? And so that I think is always the dynamic. I think the vast majority of the initiatives are actually reflect the voters and are mostly in the moderate to the left. I do think that we do have a dominant one-party state that impacts government tremendously and sometimes mutes the dialogue. But the idea that this one party doesn't reflect the voters, all polling, when you're not necessarily talking about elections per se, but public policy, shows that voters are there. I would even make the argument that voters are actually, and residents and voters, when you put a ballot on the measure, but you just ask them in general, are actually even more liberal. I hate to say this to business people. I'm being objective.
I'm agreeing with you.
They are actually more liberal than even the state legislature and even the city council in Los Angeles. Over and over, our polling shows that to be the case. And I oftentimes say, believe it or not, these Democrats that you call liberal and out of touch are actually putting a constraint on some of the voters, on some of the initiatives that could be on there. I don't know that the billionaire tax is going to make it, but to me, I think that's a crazy idea. We can debate that hey, or even the tax that's going to be here, the initiative that's going to be here. By the way, most initiatives are actually at the local level by far. And we're going to have one here in LA County about increasing sales tax for an additional $1 billion. I'm not particularly happy about that one, but I think right now, as it stands, that's going to pass. What blows me away, think about in the 24 election, the voters of LAUSD gave LAUSD $9 billion more dollars for construction, even though we have too many schools, even though they said they're not going to build an additional school, even though enrollment is declining and all that. And it passed easily. I mean, that blows me away. And so my initiative would be, if I could put it on there, that every initiative has to sunset after 12 to 14 years, so that the voters can do it and vote again. And I don't think Proposition 13 would pass again. Even though my dad, who is more liberal than Mike Bonin, but he voted for it and turned it into his dying days. So maybe I should be wrong about it.
And we're certainly going to keep hearing about Prop 13, particularly split roll, which is already playing a role in the governor's race. And it just seems like until voters make some sort of decision about that, I think we're going to hear about that until the end of time. Councilman, can you talk about how sort of what you see with the view of voters in terms of ballot measures compared to how they necessarily elect?
Yeah, sure. And since Fernando started it, I'll do my preferred ballot measure, which would be to double the funding of the California State University system. That would be a good one. If anybody has some petitions, get going. And which is exactly my point, actually. This started as sort of a populist idea, right? It was the people against a corrupt system. It was a manifestation of sort of a populist progressive energy. And it really, in many ways, has turned into just another manifestation of the system. Right now, powerful interests spend millions of dollars trying to cajole and persuade 120 members of the state legislature on a daily basis. This is their every 2-year opportunity to spend millions of dollars to cajole and persuade the voters to do something that the legislature hasn't done yet. And most of the stuff you see on the ballot is from powerful interests. Even stuff I may personally agree with, progressive stuff like the billionaire's tax. I mean, that's put up there by powerful interests. I mean, SEIU is a powerful interest in the state of California, whether you like them or don't like them. The other thing I want to point out about the ballot measures, though, is we tend to think of them in terms of sort of the financial impacts, but I do want to mention a couple ways in which they have a profound impact on sort of reshaping politics generally. I actually had my civil rights taken away by a ballot measure with Prop 8 in 2008. The day Obama got elected, my right to marry another man got taken away. The courts fixed that, but that energized a whole generation of LGBT youth and straight allies to engage. But the other one's even bigger in its profound impact on California politics was Prop 187 in the mid-90s, which was, a precursor to the anti-undocumented immigrant wave we're seeing now. But and Fernando could tell you a hell of a lot more about this than I, but that gave birth to a whole new Latino political movement in California that is now sort of in the ascendancy and in charge in many ways. And I don't know if that would have happened as fast if it weren't for the negative impacts of that and how it mobilized people.
Right. I mean, I think some would argue that California was already trending blue, but I think that many people would argue that it trended blue faster because of the backlash against Prop 187.
Yep.
And Fernando, I mean, you saw that in your research.
Yeah, I think it was an incredible transition that was happening, and Republicans, much more powerful in terms of the number of legislative and congressional seats that they have, they could see the writing on the wall to some extent, and they knew that these district elections were producing a Democratic majority in the legislature, but at large, they could still win. They could still win the governorship, they could still win initiatives, and instead of trying to do public policy through this district Democrat majority, it was easy to do it in an at-large election where they were still going to win. And so not only did you get Proposition 187, but you got Proposition 209, Proposition 219, a variety of different things that never would have passed the legislature, and also helped mobilize Republicans at that time. But in the long term, Republicans and the pro-187, they won the battle in 187. It helped them mobilize and get out the turnout, and it not only passed 187, it elected a Republican governor. I don't know that that was the major cause of that, but it certainly helped in terms of the turnout So 187 was very successful for Republicans in the short term, even though we always talk about it, how it impacted them in the long term.
Mike, can you talk about sort of, obviously you've been involved in many campaigns over the years. Can you talk about sort of the trajectory from 187 and how that impacted the state's politics?
Yeah, when your party brand is the weaker brand, which has been increasingly true of Republicans, it's overwhelmingly true now in California, you try to find cultural issues that do better than your brand does. And the whole kind of sugar calories of the 187 stuff was a way to recast the election on a wider issue that did not, because it had cultural appeal across party lines, to build a bigger coalition than R. And it was sugar calories because it was kind of short-term applause lines, but for the party brand, that plus in the recent decade, President Trump, our brand here is dug into a real quagmire. And one thing interesting about this governor's race is that in the old days, it would be the Harlem Globetrotters and Washington Generals. The Democrat would win, and the Democrat primary was often a contest of left of center interest groups, or particularly the public employee unions, who are massively powerful here. But as the Republican Party kind of has declined, there are more of these DTS votes who were occasional Republican voters who were shopping around. And I worked for Rick Caruso, and we took a real look at that in a governor's race, what the ceiling is. And the math was tricky, but better than it's ever been before in the past. And now if Mahan can put enough money behind the campaign, and I'm for him, we're going to test the theory again. So, politics is always evolving. And there's no question that 187 was an accelerant that worked in the short term, but has broken the back of the Republican Party as a statewide force here. The only, deer off that in the governor's race was Schwarzenegger. But he was not really defined by party. And believe me, we worked hard to keep it.
The other thing, too, that we're seeing...
One thing about Schwarzenegger, you got to remember, in the recall, he did not win a majority of the vote. Right. And so people always think, this was a tremendous impact. I mean, he did a great job then winning re-election, but I always remind people, he did not win a majority. He was a singular character. There's very few people on the ballot. He was a singular character, and also, I think if he was running in a normal election, there's real questions of whether he could have survived a Republican primary.
Well, we were very worried about that. The most dangerous place for Arnold was the New York City Film Critics banquet and the Republican Party of California convention,
where he famously gave that dying at the box office speech, which was pretty impressive.
We had to go once to prove we knew where it was, but. Yeah, we were, again, remember, Arnold won in this big wide open thing with everybody, which is kind of what we have now for a general primary. But, if we'd been in a standard Republican Party in the recall election, it would have been a lot tougher.
I'd say the other thing we're seeing in polling starting to simmer out there is kind of this wrong track Democrat. And there's not as many of those, but there are an increasing number who think the state is on the wrong track, and they still strongly identify as Democrats, but they have some real questions about the way the state has handled tax policy, housing, cost of living, things like that. And I think now we're veering into candidates, but I think the candidate, and I think Mahan is probably well positioned to do this if he can get money behind him, to speak to those wrong track and sort of Democrat curious, disaffected Trump Republicans. That could be a real winning coalition on both the issue side and on the candidate side.
And then, with all of us talking about the governor's race, we've had some pretty interesting developments this week, which are the result of the fact that we have a jungle primary where the top two vote getters, in the primary move on to the general election. which we've had since 2011. It was passed by voters, I believe, in 2010. And it was one of the political reforms championed by Governor Schwarzenegger and I believe Charles Munger as well. So now we have this weird situation where we have all these Democrats running for governor, like well-known, people who have held statewide office, people who have been in the cabinet, former leader of Los Angeles. And then there's two main prominent Republicans that are running. So because of top two, there is sort of a growing fear that, not that it's probable, but that it is possible that you end up with the top two of two Republican candidates. And we heard this brewing in recent weeks. We certainly heard at the state Democratic convention 2 weekends ago or a week ago. I don't even know when it was. But then this week, the state party chairman spoke publicly in a way that really stunned me. Basically saying, to the lower tier candidates, without naming them by name, saying, get out of the race. Like, you're going to screw us up. You're going to, destroy our path to having a Democrat elected governor. If we have a Republican, two Republicans at the top of the ticket, that's going to, really hurt down-ballot candidates. And, we have so many congressional races that could help determine which party controls Congress. So it seems like some of these things have unintended consequences?
Always. Everything in politics is the unintended consequence rules. I'm just going to follow the professor's advice, disagree a little. It is not going to happen with the top two R's. It is mathematically possible, but theoretically so is Martian landing if somebody knows how to bend space-time. The great thing about working for a billionaire, thinking about running for governor, is you do oppo on everybody. So I got a vault.
Oh, share.
Well, the point is, either R can hurt the other if they have money, and the D's will consolidate to some extent. Tony Thurmond is not going to be a big factor in the race. Betty Yee is not. So the natural reality of California, when you're running in a massively huge state with expensive digital and television costs, we'll call this thing down. And we're making a little mistake now, assuming that the race is actually really beginning. Primaries run late, and only about 1 out of 7 voters has made any kind of lockdown decision here. So anyway, I hear it a lot because you're right. In activist world, it's everywhere. Oh my God, we're going to have a double MAGA for. I think the laws of political gravity are going to get in the way of that, and the R's are going to. One of them, and it's already started a little bit with Hilton, is going to be the ascendant one. The question really is, would the White House get involved to clip one Republican? And I would bet good money they won't, because Trump doesn't want to own a loss, and I've been told that by people there. One of the very rare conversations I have with that crowd. But there will be, and that's what the chairman is trying to do, consolidate it. I think one question for us is, will any of the initiative debates affect the governor's race? Because Steyer he kind of came out for it. Now I'm not quite sure, but the billionaire tax.
Yeah, I think he came out for it.
Yeah.
At the convention, he was talking about it.
Talked about it, but then he didn't. It seemed like he was talking. Yeah, exactly.
There's a rumor he was going to pay for the signatures. Because this is a great secret document that Seema's going to steal from me the minute I look there. Wait, this is political consultants. We all send this to each other. This is what each signature gathering is being paid by petition. A bond for, I can't even pronounce it. I probably need what they're working on, immunology research. That only gets $6 a signature. Screw Uber, that gets 14. So it's a great way to track where the money is in an initiative.
Which is still cheaper than an Uber ride.
My favorite thing to do at the grocery store is roll up on the signature gatherers and ask them how much they're getting a signature. And they look at like this mom, like, why do you care? Why are you asking me that question?
I do that every time I go to Trader Joe's. But I think we're going to talk about the billionaire, but we will definitely talk about the billionaire's tax
there are
later.
16 on the street right now. With
And the amount of money.
They're not all going to make it.
The amount of money that the signature gatherers for the billionaire's tax is going up and up and up.
Yeah, there's $15 signature. It's almost a record.
Yeah, if you need book money.
Well, if you're thinking of doing this there are two kinds, constitutional and statutory. Constitutional needs more SIGs. You got to get over 1 million. That's, in the current initiatives, keep costing more because the SIGs cost more because it's harder. People are tired of it. You can't get it's probably $16 million just to get on the ballot and qualify with the constitutional amendment.
And we're going to talk about some of these other amendments that are proposals that could be on the ballot. But before we do that, so we talked about Talk 2 and the jungle primary and why that exists and sort of the craziness of the world right now in the governor's race. But the other thing that happened in 2010 was that voters passed independent congressional redistricting, to have our congressional lines not gerrymandered, to have them drawn by an independent panel. And then we all saw what happened last year, which was a very, very expensive ballot measure. Where after President Trump tried to get Texas and other Republican-led states to sort of alter their lines to increase the number of Republican members of Congress, Governor Newsom and California Democrats basically said, we're going to throw our independent commission we're going to put a pause on that, and we're going to do a partisan gerrymandering to try to counter that. And it was successful, and it was we've talked about this on other panels, but Amy worked for one of the main or the main group opposing the undoing Prop 50, but it was a really interesting messaging battle and results. And I have been telling my editors since 2011 that redistricting is sexy, and nobody believed me until last year because I'm having T-shirts made. But it really the battle about such an esoteric topic last year really ended up animating voters. So you're in the trenches.
Yeah, I think what the proponents did really well was it wasn't about redistricting, it was about California pushing back on Trump. And you can't overcome that in this state. I mean, I think the people of California would vote to do almost anything if they could push back on Trump. And so, I think that is in some ways a larger problem with the initiative process that, frequently voters are asked to vote on things that are highly complex and probably should go through the legislative process where we have hearings and we bring in experts and they're analyzed and, folks have a chance to weigh in and, but instead folks are asked to read a 3-paragraph LAO summary, decide yes or no, and that can result in very unintended consequences. Legislative redistricting and congressional redistricting are highly complex, but we had great success passing that initially by framing it as the voters should pick their politicians, the politicians shouldn't pick the people. But in this case, voters said, we don't care, anything that checks Trump, we're great with that. But I do think voters are smart, and if politicians come back a second time and say, we want to suspend the Citizens Redistricting Commission in perpetuity or one more time, they'll say, no, thank you. You told this was a one-time emergency, and they spent $110 million saying that. So I do think that will stick with voters, but I still think that's, to be seen how all that shakes out. And then I do think some of the conversations around other initiatives have opened as a result of redistricting. I think we're having a real conversation about, do we change top 2? Because that's been now gamified. Do we go to ranked choice or top 4? Charles has literally written a War and Peace novel length piece on this. So, they do have consequences.
That dynamic that you mentioned, though, about that esoteric issue becoming about Trump, that I think is going to be how things play out with the initiative to try to require voter ID and citizenship, right? That's also sort of a wonky process one. It's one that voters sort of get.
That one's easier to understand.
It's easier to understand.
I think most people wouldn't have known what the word redistricting is, a year ago.
But I do think that one's going to be turned into this is how we fight back against Trump.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Look, here it's pretty simple. You make it about Trump, you got a 20-point lead. I'm just about it. So, there may be some fatigue, but I think a lot of this stuff this year won't make a ballot, but there's going to be plenty. And they're going to be single voters if they smell any Trump on it or an instant no. One of the little secrets of the initiative world, voters love voting no. If you confuse them, they vote no. One of the best vote no arguments is it's a good idea. But if you read the fine print, there are problems. Let's write a better law next year. Improve it. No. And people love that. And in an initiative campaign, most of you are undecided. About 5-1, 4-1 will break to the no side, which is why it's very important when you begin. Now, some initiatives are famous and debated. Others are like, car leaps down the ballot. But if it's going to be debated, you really want to start high, because it is a story of decline as people get more doubts.
And that's what was one of the things that was so interesting about Prop 50, because initially in the polling, it actually didn't. It didn't do that.
Nobody understood it.
Yeah, exactly. So initially, it was very.
Then it became Trump, and it got very clear.
Exactly. And also the other thing I wanted to ask you guys about, since we all now receive mail ballots, every registered voter, how has that changed the electorate that weighs in on these initiatives?
Well, remember in California, and then I'll shut up. The election day is 3 weeks long.
Right.
You really want to peak minus 20 days. Now, most people hold their absentees; they come later. But you get a chunk, about a third, that comes in pretty quickly, and you don't want to give that up without a fight.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, we're talking about California stuck or moving forward when it comes to election and everything that the state could do for us to be able to vote. I think we're moving forward. I would make the argument that nowhere in the country is it easier to vote than in Los Angeles County and in California. And it's because of a lot of these rules that we've passed. We were not the first to do universal vote by mail, but now we have that. We were not the first to do all kinds of different electoral changes, but we've actually implemented almost all of them. Same day registration, things of that nature. It is really easy to vote in California.
And especially given our size, I mean, we have 39 million residents, 27 million, I believe, registered voters. So all of these impacts have not just impacts on our governance, but on national policy and national elections.
It also, I think, is starting to impact which elements of sort of political and campaign infrastructures make money off elections. It's putting more of an emphasis on canvassing, right? Because when everybody gets before people only got a ballot if they went or if they were registered for one by mail, there's a heavy emphasis on mail and on TV advertising, and there's still a big part of that. But now, campaigns are spending more and more on canvassing to send people to the doors. You get your ballot, well, can you fill it out now? And we can actually submit it for you.
And then we'll leave you alone.
Right, yeah.
We'll stop calling you, we'll stop knocking on your door if you just submit the ballot.
Just one quick bugaboo, it will be 30 seconds. I am for mail-in balloting and all this, but California keeps refusing to join a bunch of other states in sharing voter registration lists. It's very easy for me to vote back home in Detroit and in California and not get caught. I don't think there's a lot of fraud. I'm not one of these fraud fanatics, but that's a common sense thing. And a lot of it's by mistake. People stay registered somewhere else, but for whatever reason, and we're important because we're so big, we and several other states have not joined this thing. About 30 of them are in it.
I will say, I love the convenience of it, but I do kind of miss going to the elementary school down the street and seeing the volunteers and the flags and all of that, and seeing your neighbors. But anyway, that's an aside. So finally, let's talk about June and November for the ballots, ballot initiatives that are on the street right now. We've talked. The billionaire's tax, I think, is getting the most coverage and the most attention, and is likely to get a lot of money. Being spent on both for it and against it. We hear about billionaires leaving the state, Peter Thiel, people from Google. Then we have other billionaires who are supportive of it. Silicon Valley is really involved. So what do you all think of? And then also, this is also showing divisions in the Democratic Party. You have a number of sort of the more progressive candidates or leaders supporting it, like Ro Khanna. You had Bernie Sanders out here campaigning for it. But then you have people like Governor Newsom or San Jose Mayor Matt Mahan who are opposed to it, believing that it'll drive entrepreneurs out of the state and ultimately just end up making our budget situation worse because our budget is so volatile because of Prop 13. Our budget is so reliant on wealthy people and taxes from wealthy people and capital gains. So what do you all think about the billionaire's tax, how it's playing out? Do you think it's going to make the ballot? And if it does, do you think voters will support it?
Well, Bob told me to say I'm against it because they're not taking my money. I had no idea he was a billionaire. So I've done some work on this. I had a couple of billionaires call me at the end of the year. It was actually rather funny. One of them was, God damn it, I'm a working billionaire. I've got $1 billion that I can't sell. And it's true. It's a big thing that would never sell. So I'm going to have to go take a loan out for 40, And so I'm calling you from Florida. And I don't want to live there. Raise my income tax. I'm fine with that. So anyway, we did a poll. And we waited till the title and summary came out, which is important in polling. You want to test what's on the ballot. It came out with California efficiency the day after Christmas. We polled after New Year's, and it convinced me this thing is much weaker than the perception of it. Not because people don't like billionaires. No, not great. Wear a T-shirt around, I'm a billionaire, see how it works out. Second, not because they don't like taxing billionaires more. They love it. But nobody thinks this thing will collect a dime because they say, one, they've got lawyers and the Trump Supreme Court, and they're going to find a way out of it, or they're going to leave the state like Spielberg did. The other thing they don't like, and this is what you learn in polling, there's something in the ballot language that 90% of the money goes to healthcare, 10% to education. Average voters read that and they think of the entire budget and they're like, they're screwing education. So we had it at 40 yes, when you want to start at 59-62, and 8 lean. So 48 with a weak 8 and about 40 no. And there'd be a whole bunch, there's like a gold rush of consultants, more than is necessary, trying to make a fast buck defeating this thing from billionaires.
This is like the political.
My point is, it is just generically kind of a dog of an initiative.
Yeah, and I think one thing we're seeing that's really interesting is Silicon Valley, with the exception of maybe Meg Whitman and Steve Poizner and a few others, has really been on the sidelines of California politics, despite the fact that they live and grow their businesses here. And I think we've seen them emerge on this. And I think a big question is, in a post-billionaire tax world, or if it doesn't qualify for the ballot, which is possible, I think they're only at 25% and they have a long way to go before April. Does this force stay in California politics? Has it woken them up permanently, or will they lose interest and just move everything to Austin and Florida and say, we're done with you? I think that's really interesting because they do have the resources to run the campaigns necessary to change voter sentiment or get messaging out. So I think that's very interesting. I do think the Political Consultant Gold Rush Act of 2026 will consolidate at some point. I think there are several lanes for the campaign, but I do think at some point it'll all come together because it's not helpful to have a campaign with 7 yes committees all saying something different. It's just doesn't work.
Well, you've got some billionaires, about 100 million they pulled together for a bunch of vote yes reform stuff, which is going to be hard. Vote yes is hard. Reform is hard. Very easy. You don't need the same. A $30 million no campaign can beat a $60 million yes campaign. But there's no money now. These billionaires became billionaires by being slow check writers, and I pitched a few of them. But if the thing makes the ballot, and it's hit 25%, they just put their papers in. I'm still not sure it will, but if it does, then you will see a bunch of no money pile up, and the thing will lose. And Gavin's against it too, which gives it Gavin's had a comeback in his numbers since 50. So that gives it a seal of approval of Democrats. Left to their own, Democrats are the only group that are majority for it, but not enough.
Yeah, I think it'll qualify because of who's behind it, SEIU and the nurses and all. I think it's going to have a hard time winning. I mean, it's a concept that seems like it should win, but to Mike's point before, good idea, but poorly written. This is kind of poorly written, and I don't think the messaging on it has been particularly good. I think you can make this an anti-Trump thing, right? Trump is stealing, hundreds of millions of dollars of your tax dollars from California. Who is going to pay to fill that gap? Right. His friends, who he's making richer, or low-income Californians who are going to get sick and die?
Yeah, I think the Roe bill in Congress could have some legs because one of the big arguments that works well is that it will bleed California dry of innovation and jobs. And if you have a national billionaires tax, people can stay here. So that may have more legs than I think the California one.
Right. I mean, that's how Newsom sort of tries to massage his way to saying, well, I overall support this idea, just not on a state-by-state basis. And I do think you're right to your earlier point about how, Silicon Valley, I mean, it's always had a libertarian streak and they've occasionally gotten involved, but we really are seeing sort of this emergence of Silicon Valley leaders who just being much more publicly involved. And before they were raising money for people and they were involved behind the scenes, but now being much more publicly involved in California politics, which will be interesting to watch.
I think there's just enough arguments for moderate Democrats, even liberal Democrats, to vote no. The Newsom factor that it should be national, et cetera, that we really don't know what is going to, whether it's going to work.
What does the California Teachers Association do? Because they're a hugely powerful, potent force in California politics. And as you mentioned, 90% healthcare, 10% education. There are some people who are unhappy about that.
Oh, well, when I was working for Schwarzenegger, the big cage match at the end of every budget is SEIU versus the teachers versus prison guards. It's like 5 hungry dogs, 1 dish. And, those fractions are still, you guys know it, are under the water more. But the minute we had our polling out, which, the governor requested we spread around, and we did, I got a call from not the California local that's behind the San Francisco local, but the statewide. Can we see the polling? Because I can tell they're less than thrilled about this thing, and they smell loser on it, which, we got enough problems. Why do we need to go fight billionaires where it kills us to put 40 million together and they write a check for 100 and it's over? So, I think the other big special interest one, just to tee it up if you want to go there, Seema, is this, and this is pure interest group stuff, the Uber one. Because Uber and the trial lawyers are about to go at it, and they both have initiatives trying to trump the other one on liability stuff, trying to limit the tort bar.
So what do you guys think about that? Because obviously all of us, most of us, we rely on Uber. It's a convenience, but also you hear some horrific tales about whether it's assaults, whether it's accidents and people not getting made whole. What do you think the voters' perceptions are of Uber and rideshare services more broadly and their liability, and how could that impact the ballot?
My general impression is I think people like the service, but I think people who talk to their drivers, also know the drivers are getting screwed,
Right.
And they're probably not particularly fond of the companies themselves.
They've got disclosure. I run an electric vehicle C4 because I'd rather not have China take over the entire American auto industry, being a good son of Detroit. So Uber's donated to my work. That said, I think their vote yes is going to lose. Vote yes is hard. Initiatives that take something away. So wait a minute. I got a drunk Uber driver and he drives into a wall and I can't sue anybody? Horseshit. I'm not giving that right away. And you're right. When people talk to Uber drivers, it's generally not that great. So I think the trial lawyers who have vote no and should have money have an advantage on this one.
Let's talk about CEQA reform. I mean, obviously, at one point that was for Democrats, it was a third rail, the California Environmental Quality Act. But now, given the obvious housing inaffordability, the need for more housing, you see another splintering among Democrats about what we need to do about environmental regulations to make it easier to build houses, to be able to help hopefully lower the cost of housing, to make it affordable for people's kids to be able to when they buy a house here. So what do you think about the prospects of CEQA reform on the ballot?
I think if you can make it about making housing less expensive, it passes.
Yeah, it's a real shot.
It'll be housing less expensive versus screwing the environment.
Right.
And it's not nearly as cut and dry as that on either side. This is the kind of ballot measure, to my mind, that shouldn't be on the ballot.
That's right.
This is a complex piece of legislation, and it absolutely needs to be changed for many of the reasons the proponents are saying, but it's not going to be carefully put together by a voter initiative. It's going to take the legislative process to do it.
I'm just fascinated by the arc of it. I mean, I covered the environment 20-some years ago in Orange County, and then when you talked about CEQA with Democrats, if you were a Democrat and you said anything about changing CEQA, you were done.
Yeah, as someone who tried to build affordable housing in wealthy areas, CEQA was used all the time to stop shit, and it was never about the environment.
Right.
Never.
Right.
I just want a hallelujah Mike on this. The first thing that happens in an excuse me, I think Bob gave me a stink. The first thing happens in an initiative battle is they hire folks in my business, and we say make this thing as stupid as possible. And so we're trying to do rocket science here with growth and development and the environment, and turning it into a pro wrestling show with 30-second ads, not a good formula for policy.
Well, also, I wonder what happens with the Coastal Act, 'cause that's another thing that was approved by voters in the aftermath of the big oil spill in Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
And that's also something that people have argued has really impacted housing in coastal zones. And I wonder if that's another sort of landmark California environmental law that also might get changed in the future. Okay, what else do we have on the ballot? Sorry.
Well, we
What
have the
else do we have?
Hertzberg thing. That's qualified.
Oh, which one?
It's the housing loans.
Oh,
I don't know much about it.
I don't know much about that one either. I'm sorry, there's too much stuff on the ballot already.
There's one that I think is really important to mention because it will have a significant impact on how much money your cities have to spend, which is a Howard Jarvis taxpayer one
right.
that would both undo measures like the city of Los Angeles has passed with its transfer tax on high-value real estate transactions, which pays for homeless funding. But it would also raise the threshold for voter approval for local taxes. There have been some estimates, and this is from the League of California Cities, which is going to tell you the worst-case scenario for California cities, but they say this is going to cost cities tens of millions of dollars every year, and that's going to be a cut in services. There's also going to be, and I think the legislature is putting this one on, another ballot measure that would require that any ballot measure that changes the voter threshold of approval has to meet the same threshold of approval.
I agree with that one.
And it would take effect for anything on this ballot. So the Howard Jarvis thing could potentially get over 50% and not win because the other one might say it needs 2/3.
Well, Howard Jarvis has done that a lot to bond. It's
It's so clever because the Howard Jarvis point of view is, well, we get up to 60 or 60, whatever the big threshold, these things won't pass. So this thing says, all right, you want to put a poison pill in? The first poison pill is your thing.
Yeah.
Now, we've seen this in Florida, by the way, which started to turn into California with a lot of initiatives. And a mix of policies and interest groups there said, this is going to grow out of control. Aren't we tired of running these $100 million? And so, tears in every political consultant's eye. But they raised the threshold to get a ballot measure done statewide, and now there are a lot fewer ballot measures. We could see a movement toward that in California. Even though it's so ingrained here, I think there's some fatigue, and if we have 8 of these things on the ballot or whatever, and they're all confusing. One of the old tricks in the initiative business is, well, these guys may pass their yes to kill us in the screen door industry. We're past our free Cadillacs for blind kids and don't screw up screen doors one to try to you get one vote more and screw their yes with our yes.
Right, and we're seeing that with the billionaires tax, where there are 3 competing measures.
They're doing that, and also in the tort bar versus Uber, they've got one too. So it's gamified, which I think people.
Before every election, and I'm sure the same for everyone on the panel, you get inundated by friends who want you to explain a ballot measure or explain something. I honestly think, based on the conversations I've had over the past 10 years, voters would really prefer much more public attention on who the hell is running for judge than they would on billions of dollars or millions of dollars of more ads about the ballot measure.
That's what I spend the most time on my ballot on, trying to figure out, because you just know nothing about these races. And that, like the other thing, you have some idea, but okay.
Just very quickly, just for political nerds, Colorado, they have a crazy ballot. Well, it's actually pretty smart. They're looking at one which will require all ballot measures to be written in 8th grade English, which is kind of interesting, I think. I think
that is
if it's executed well, it's not a bad idea, because right now they're.
It all depends on what 8th grade English means.
Right.
It's like
some Colorado 8th grade English teacher is going to be the most powerful person sitting atop the board approving me.
And then we need to get a question to Q&A soon, but I just wanted to bring up 2 other ballot measures that we might see and we perennially see. We talked about voter ID, which it looks like that has qualified. It seems like they've submitted enough signatures to qualify for the ballot. And then there's perennial attempts to reform Prop 13, which we also touched upon, but I think that's something. So if you guys have any thoughts on that quickly, and then more broadly, I just wanted to conclude with asking you, do you think that the initiative process sort of works in the way that its supporters imagined? Do voters serve as like an appropriate check on the state's elected officials and the powerful, or do they have too much power without understanding the complexities of what we're talking about? And has it just been completely corrupted by special interests that it was supposed to be against? Or, supposed to check?
My answer is no, yes, no, and yes.
I just quickly say, no, it's not what they intended. But remember, most of these things lose. So it's not always like a special interest can show up and push through a yes that makes them all rich. Only about, I think, 29% have won in the history of the state, and some of those are non-controversial. The ones that are debated and fought, even a higher percentage lose. So I don't think it's quite the runaway train, but it's sure not what they intended.
I would gather that the people who created this system did not anticipate that if they looked in a crystal ball that they would see ballot measure after ballot measure about Indian gaming and dialysis.
Well, Mike is right that most of them lose. The one type that almost always wins are bond measures. And just in LA County, for instance, last year, there were something like 40 some odd bond measures, all but one passed. And the one that didn't pass had over 50%, but not the required 55%. And it was almost something like $22 billion that was approved by the voters. And so but they're understandable. We're going to tax you to build X, and people vote for that.
And voters are smart. We all spend a lot of money trying to pass these things, but you can't pull one over the voters and get them to vote for something that they ultimately don't want to, which is why you see so many fail, because when they're confused, they just say, no, thank you. I mean, I do this for a living, and occasionally I get my ballot. What was it? Which one's that? I don't like that consultant. I'm voting no. So, I do think voters are smart and can see through the money. I can think of a few instances where voters saw through the money and said.
Also, that's the other thing. It's had an enormous. The amount of money that has been spent on these ballot measures. I mean, it's I don't know what else that could have been spent on, or if there are other races in other states that would be better spent on, but it's the amount of money we see here. There's a lot of money to be made here. I went into the wrong line of work. Okay, so let's open it up for Q&A.
Technically, this wouldn't be a referendum, but what's your view on whether, I think you have your microphone. What I was saying, this isn't technically a referendum, but what's your view on whether the Senate will pass ACA 7 and then what will happen with it if it is passed in November?
What is ACA 7?
ACA 7 is an effort to partially repeal Prop 209. In the current version of ACA 7, it repeals it for financial grants like loans, grants to students. There was a prior version that was a more complete repeal, but this is a partial repeal. Yeah. And it passed, this version and the original version both passed the Assembly, and the Senate's now deciding whether to put it on the November ballot.
Yeah, we had something that tried to overturn 209 not too long ago, and that wasn't successful. It again always depends on the amount of money and who's willing to fund one effort. And if it's it sounds good that it's going to be too complicated, that it's only partially this, and it leads to the whole discussion that Mike and Amy are talking about. People tend to vote no. So I think it would have an uphill battle.
And then if it passed the Senate, then the question is, what will voters in Iowa and New Hampshire think about it? Because that will have an impact on whether or not the governor signs it.
Oh, no. The governor doesn't have to sign it. You can put a amendment to the state constitution on the ballot.
Oh, put it on the ballot.
Through the legislature.
Yeah.
The governor does not have
Right.
to.
Got it. I thought it was a bill.
No, it's assembly constitutional amendment.
But you probably have to weigh in, and that I think also speaks to the same point. Your husband's play in other parts of the country, which some would argue that's the reason that he's opposed to millionaire's tax.
I mean, I am completely and totally in favor of affirmative action. That's how I got into this university to begin with, and how I got into my graduate. I am an anchor baby. I was an affirmative action student, and I was a DEI hire. And for me, it's worked, and I think I'm an example of that. However, when we try to implement these in a very broad way, especially with hiring, et cetera, and set-asides, everything that I've ever looked at, it's never worked out very well. And I'm never happy with it. So it's a tough one, man. Yeah.
No, I don't know the current state of play, but getting something on the ballot by the legislature, unless the governor's shoulder is really behind it, and I'm not seeing that, I would bet against it generic, at least in this. They're going to have a huge budget war too, and that's going to distract attention. But I don't know for sure. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mike talked about the escalating costs per signature that signature gatherers were getting. And I know that there's, because of Citizens United, there's constitutional limitations on limiting the expenditures to qualify initiatives. But I wondered whether a requirement for disclosure at the time that signatures are being gathered, with a legislative requirement or constitutional requirement, what the panelists would think about that as a check on that as a practice, and whether it's viable even legally and constitutionally.
It's like if you remember ads for Prop 50.
I think Isaac Bryan had a bill that passed that does that. It's just I don't think it makes much of a difference.
Yeah, I don't think anyone, in a hurry out of Trader Joe's is going to stop.
Yeah.
Look.
I think all of us look because they're like, who's paying for this? But I think for the average person, this is also why I think the billionaire's tax is really interesting, because if you can boil it down to a one sentence line, hey, do you want billionaires to pay more taxes to fund healthcare? I don't know that anyone's looking to see, hey, which labor union is funding this effort?
I just was thinking more that the person who, when they contact you at Trader Joe's, that they would have to disclose that they're being paid rather than as a volunteer.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, what is killing the signature world right now is the commercial real estate people are not letting them on the mall properties like they used to. So that's driving the cost up pretty significantly. So the costs are double what they were per state 10 years ago. This year is going to set all the records, you know. Now, one thing that does start to curb signatures, and other states have done degrees of this, is you start getting very tricky about who can gather signatures. You know, well, they have to have a political science degree and speak 4 languages. You know, the states have done this to kind of curb the industry. There are people who travel around the country.
Yeah, I have my signature gatherers in California who are from Florida. Who just come
No. It's okay. If you're good at it and you don't want to sell life insurance door to door, and you get in front of somebody and you get 5 signatures, you make $100. Wow. So, you know, it's real
and they're
money.
gathering signatures for like multiple, you know.
But you can have, people have to be, I think one state, one of the small ones, you have to be a voter in the county where you're getting, you know, there are ways to have that. And maybe that'll grow. Though there's a speech issue here, so I'm not a complete fiend for some of this, but there are methods other than, nobody even looks at the petitions. Remember, you have to get you get 1.2 million signatures to qualify 870,000. Because people write Mickey Mouse and I hate this guy making me sign. It's actually kind of fun to read them. So but there are ways to monkey with.
There's also a lot.
How much of an industry it was until maybe 5-10 years ago. And I literally realizing you have people from other states traveling here to do this.
Well over 100 million right now.
Well, and it's it's so much easier to get somebody to sign a petition than it is to get them to vote for something, right? Because all you say is, all it does is put it on the ballot, right? And people tend to sign it.
I just tell people I'm a felon. So said I can't. I can't. Obviously. Go ahead.
Hello. My name is Paulina Huang. I'm alumni of the MRA program. I also did my PhD study for investment index of the real estate long time ago. Okay. So my question is, this like a ballot about the impact. So like this ballot will impact the like a institutional capital fighting. If an insurance company and pension fund got the California ballot, and they will increase in regulatory or the tax risk. So what strategy should policymakers adopt to prevent institutional capital from shifting to market like Las Vegas and Dallas? And right now, I was a real estate developer and architect for commercial, and we designed the Bellagio in Vegas and also do a lot of projects in the California. And I have the 3-state license, the real estate license in California, Nevada, or the New York. So this, I also from Taiwan, I'm Taiwan American. So we have a lot of capital from New York want to invest 3 of the major cities. So should I go to Nevada, New York, and exit California? Or I need to bring $1 billion into Los Angeles City? I need to know. Thank you.
I feel qualified for financial advice because nobody wants financial advice from me.
But the billionaire tax,
I
mean, it taxes your assets. And I had a group of students up in Sacramento, along with the Pat Brown Institute. USC usually goes with us, et cetera. And we had the legislative analyst talk to us and like, what are you going to do? How are you going to define this? And he was like, you know, this is really tough. Yeah. I mean, I'm supposed to give him
the idea that it's retroactive.
Right, that's retroactive.
I understand how that there will be so many legal challenges.
And he says, part of it, and he was pretty honest and more direct than I thought he was going to be. It's very difficult to say how much it's going to raise. Right. Number one, and some of these estimates are way off.
Well, how do you know what's in people's houses? Like, what kind of artwork is?
Well, it creates a corruption incentive because I'm a state bureaucrat and now I can make $100 million tax decision.
Yeah. So
to appraise somebody's intangible asset.
Yeah, so the question was, should I move somewhere else? It's too late. It's retroactive,
right.
To some extent.
I think that's going to be one, and if it makes developments approved, that's obviously one of the legal challenges that involve it.
It's wind up in the Trump Supreme Court.
Right.
And this is not a problem I have, but there are people who are paper billionaires. And you think about Elizabeth Holmes at the height of the Theranos situation. Yeah. She was a billionaire. I don't think she could have written the check for the billionaire tax. And that is a problem for some of these startup founders who are doing really well.
The billionaire billionaires who hired me to do this poll and see how scary this thing is, they're all in that category. Like, let's say tomorrow you go buy, what's a good intangible asset? You go buy a sports team, which is valued at $9 billion, but it's not liquid at all. Well, now the state of California wants $450 million cash from you. And what are you going to do? You're going to hire lawyers and move. And the other problem, and LAO put this in, which was a real hit, is when we scare them all out of the state, we're going to lose all that.
Right.
Yes, that's the other part, right.
And that we are so dependent,
Yeah.
the state's revenue,
Right.
you know, we are so dependent on that. Hong Kong.
Yeah, but what I didn't understand, does it, someone mentioned to this, but I couldn't find it in the bill, was in the write-up, is that it only impacts money above $1 billion, so that if you,
No, I think if you have $1 billion or $1.1
Triggers
billion.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So by the way,
5%.
every billionaire is going to get the 999.
Right.
That's why no state really does this. A few have monkeyed with it. It is so hard. You want to clip billionaire, anybody who makes over 20 million a year has a 5%. There, go to income. The whole system is set up to tax either goods like Europe or income. That's what it knows how to do.
But it also, I hadn't thought about this before, but it also raises the question, and I think that some people use to argue about estate taxes, which is if you've made this money and you've paid taxes on it and then you use it to buy a Picasso or something, then are you being double taxed on that? I mean, I think there's just like a lot of interesting questions about this.
Capital gains, same
Right,
thing. I
right.
invest $100, get a $10 dividend, I'm taxed on that too.
Right. Oh,
Yeah, sorry, we've solved that.
Thank you for that answer. I'm her project assistant, actually. And so my question is, commercial property insurance costs have risen dramatically due to climate risk and litigation. Do you foresee ballot initiatives addressing insurance regulation or climate liability that could impact underwriting costs for commercial properties?
Politically, it's a tough one because when you deal with insurance, you're dealing with mutualization. And so should somebody in Reseda pay more because somebody has a house near a wildfire zone in Malibu? When you take that to the voters, if they figure it out, they don't want to cross-subsidize. One of the little problems we have in California is we like to build nice houses in places that are not a smart place to build a house. A wine country, so when you go to the voters with how much should you pay to subsidize them? When in some of the polling we did last year, there was an interesting question we asked of City of LA voters on the Palisades fires. Do you think the Palisades rebuild should be the mayor's top #1 priority, or can the rich people in the Palisades take care of themselves and it should be one of many other priorities? And that thing split 50-50.
Oh, really?
So yeah, it was like +2 for the rebuild.
And the people in the Palisades think the mayor has done the latter.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh. So
Well,
my
there is
point
like-
being, insurance is hard because it's about spreading pain around and cost.
I mean, but there is also, I think, I feel like growing anger at insurance companies, feeling like, that, you pay in for years or decades, and then when you actually need them, that they don't.
And that is our struggle as commercial real estate, developers and.
That's our struggle as homeowners.
Right.
I had mine,
But
my
then
insurance got canceled.
Really?
I think that a lot of it also depends on what happens in the usually sleepy but interesting this year insurance commissioners race. If, for instance, like there's a bunch of candidates running, and one of them is Jane Kim, who's a former San Francisco supervisor, who's basically birthed the California Working Families Party. She is very anti-insurance industry. If she gets elected, the insurance industry is for sure going to be putting stuff on the ballot. For sure.
And the insurance industry is actually a great example of the initiative process kind of gone awry because there was, I think it was 103, which created an ability for groups to intervene in rate cases. Now I'm going hard wonky, but to intervene in rate cases and insurance cases. So it's really hard for insurance companies to raise rates, which could be good, could be bad, but the initiative process created this loophole, and then interest groups, primarily Consumer Watchdog, then profit off of that 103 loophole. And so, that's an initiative that has contributed to California's insurance situation. I think the legislature is working really hard on this issue so that it doesn't go to the ballot, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, just quick, I'll be the insurance shill here. You can all boom me down. I work for that industry. Boo. Boo. Maybe it's like health insurance. We want it all, but we don't want to pay. So my dad, who's 94, wants to get a new shoulder, and he's mad that there's like a deductible. You know, that's insane. And he was a healthcare lawyer his whole career. The average insurance company makes 2 or 3% on the underwriting, and they float the money they will pay you later if your house burns down or you crash your car, and they invest that, and they make the investment profits. Not a gold mine. It's a very competitive business, and it's generally profitable. But people think it's this incredible gold mine minting zillions of dollars. And they're doing a lot better at Google. So if people don't like insurance because they're mutualizing cost. You know, you want the ability when you're in an accident to sue and get $800,000, you have it in California. But somebody has to pay for the $800,000. So anyway, our insurance market here, there are a lot of good reform things, but it does mean pulling back on the money element. People don't like that. We also have very expensive homes. And again, people like to build them where they shouldn't. And then when they burn down, it's the insurance company. So, I mean, Caruso, I met with his engineers. It was interesting. I wanted to learn about this. When they built the Palisades, they said, you know, we're in a fire zone here. Well, let's make it out of concrete. You know, if you think ahead a little, and now in the new Palisades, the good news is they're on top of that. The new houses are going to be much more viable, and over time, frustrating time, and the insurance companies will make a little extra when they can, so they will not lead the righteous parade here. They're not saints. The insurance costs should start to be more reasonable.
Well, and just to give a different perspective on the insurance industry on this very issue, when I was in office, I represented Palisades and also Brentwood, and there were people there who wanted to make their homes more fire defensive, more sustainable. They wanted to put in all sorts of resiliency measures. And they couldn't because it would have triggered a review of their insurance policy and they wouldn't have gotten reinsured.
Yeah, exactly. When in doubt, don't quote me, buy mutual insurance from the mutual companies. Then you're one of the owners with your policy.
Thank you for your question. Do you have a question?
Yes. Good afternoon. Earlier, the panel talked about California being very progressive and offering different ways to vote. I believe in December of this past year, 2025, the U.S. Postal Service made a slight change to the way that your votes are postmarked, right? So now I believe, you know, depending on when you dropped off your ballot through mail-in ballot, it might take 1 to 3-4 days for it to be stamped. Do you foresee that playing a role in this upcoming primary or the general election?
Well, it's sort of interesting because before, like, it was pretty set that, you know, if you dropped off your ballot at the ballot box or you voted on by election day or you mailed it and it was postmarked on that day, then it had 7 days, so many days to get to, you know, the register of voters and be counted. But now in some counties last year, we saw that, I don't fully understand it still, but we saw that morning that even if you mailed it on election day, because of how long it would take them to process it, that your ballot might not count. And there were ballots that did not count because of this. And I think people are looking into it because it sort of goes against pretty much everything that we've traditionally done.
And that's one of the things that I was looking at, if it makes sense, you know, to inform family members and friends, hey, don't look at the June 2nd deadline, look at the end of, you know, May as your precursor to mail it.
Everyone should vote early because then, like, people will stop bothering you, they'll stop calling you, they'll stop texting you, you'll stop getting like annoying mail that, you know, is killing a million trees. So I think there's many good reasons to vote early, and then you just get.
Yeah, a lot of voters don't know that, is that campaigns track who's voting so they can spend less money by targeting you. So you want to get them off your back? Vote right away.
And I think that particular issue is more pronounced in the rural counties. So if you live up in Alturas and you drop it off at a post office where they don't come as frequently, it could be a problem. And I think voters up there are more used to the hard rural life and will know that. And it's not a huge population center, but or put it in the drop box, you know.
I was going to say the drop box, or even go to the vote center. And one of the things I think vote centers need to do, and our vote centers, is to have 2 lines, one where you're going to actually vote, and one where many people are actually in that line with their vote already cast or filled out. Just have a line where they could just drop it off. But just that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and part of it, I think, is also, you know, it's public education. And when I learned about this last fall, or I guess after the November election, I was stunned because, you know, I think we all just assume, you know, if you get it in the mail by election day, you're done. And, you know, that's not always true, apparently. Thanks.
Again, I'm the top grump. The Republicans invented vote by mail.
Yes.
Great weapon. Now, White House hates it. I liked it better pre-COVID when you had to sign up on the permanent absentee list. You had to make one postcard and then you're on it. I don't really like the spraying we do now. I walk into an apartment building, I see 20 ballots. There's not a lot of evidence of fraud, but.
Actually, there's no evidence of fraud, but let's go on. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was press secretary in the Secretary of State's office 20 years ago, and there were election conspiracies then, and so it's not a new thing, but you're right. Fraud is not like
I think
it is
misinformation,
worse,
disinformation.
because we have the internet now. But,
Exactly.
yeah, fraud is not a thing.
Okay, I think we have run out of time, but thank you so much for your questions. Thank you to my panelists.
Thank you.
Great words, and I will be calling and quoting all of you soon.